The first case that we are going to analyze is that of a drop in consumer confidence. Well, consumer confidence, this should already be sparking some lights in that consumer. Wait a second, this is part of the aggregate demand side. This is part of spending. And indeed, this is going to be a demand shock. So now we've identified whether the event shifts aggregate demand or aggregate supply. Specifically, in this case, it's going to shift aggregate demand. And because we have a decrease in consumption expenditures, we know that aggregate demand is going to shrink. It's going to decrease, and so it's going to shift to the left. Let's visualize this in a graph. In this graph, we have our short-run and long-run equilibrium both occurring at the level of output of potential GDP. Here you have the long-run aggregate supply, of course. It's vertical at the level of potential GDP, and this potential GDP is also the level of output that sets the aggregate demand curve and the short-run aggregate supply curve in equilibrium. But now we're going to shock this economy, okay? This is our decrease in consumption expenditures driven by this drop of consumer confidence. We don't know what these consumers are expecting, but it's probably not good. So our third step now is to look for the new short-run equilibrium. Where is that going to happen? Well, that's going to happen at the intersection of the short-run aggregate supply. It hasn't changed. We're still looking at the blue line, SRAS 0, but now our aggregate demand is a new one. It has changed. It has decreased. The level of spending in the economy has decreased. And so the new short-run equilibrium is going to occur at point E1. At point E1, we see that there's a lower price level and a lower real GDP. Now, what we observe here is that at the level Y1, it is below the level of potential GDP. So this economy is producing below potential output. So what we are looking at is a recessionary gap. Now, meanwhile, in the labor market, this economy is producing less output. It's producing less output, and at the same time, the price level has decreased. Nominal wages have stayed the same. So if the price level has decreased, nominal wages has stayed the same, the real wage rate has gone up. And now here's the issue with the real wage rate going up. Now, the demand for labor from firms is going to drop. Instead of being LN, which was the quantity of labor that set the labor market in equilibrium, labor demand is going to be lower. It is now LD1 for labor demand 1. With a higher real wage, there are more people wanting to work, more people entering the labor force. So you see that the quantity of labor supplied has increased to LS for labor supply 1. What do we have over here? We have a surplus of labor. The labor market is off balance, right? There is this imbalance between the quantity of labor demanded and the quantity of labor supplied. How do we decrease this imbalance? How do we fix it? I see only one way, which is to get the real wage rate back to equilibrium. With time, this is going to happen. This is going to adjust. As soon as nominal wages begin to change, as soon as enough time has passed for people to start accepting lower wages, and as these lower wages occur, firms are also going to hiring more people. And what we see is this increase in the quantity of labor demanded as real wages are going down, and this decrease in the quantity of labor supplied as the real wage is going down. These are fewer people wanting to work or look for a job. So this is the adjustment that's going to happen in the long run. How do we see this in our usual diagram? Well, given enough time, we just saw that the real wage rate is going to go down, right? Well, Think about this for a second. As the real wage is going to go down, that's the price of inputs changing. Now, we have stopped looking into the demand side and we are looking into production. We are seeing that as the price of resources falls, our short-run aggregate supply is going to shift as well. And in this case, it's going to shift to the right because input prices have fallen. And so we are going to have a new short-run aggregate supply. Now we're again going to be looking for an equilibrium. And this equilibrium is going to be a short-run equilibrium, but probably you have seen it already. It's going to be a short-run equilibrium, but it's also going to bring back our economy into a long-run equilibrium. And why is that? Because that point where the new aggregate demand curve intersects the new aggregate supply curve, that occurs at a level of output such that is compatible with the full employment level of output. Finally, our economy is in equilibrium at last. So to recap, this economy was in equilibrium before consumer confidence changed. There was a demand shock that decreased aggregate demand, so we had a new short-run equilibrium at E1. With enough time, as soon as nominal wages and prices adjusted, what we saw was that there was a decrease in the prices of inputs, and that increased the short-run aggregate supply to SRAS1. So we had yet a third equilibrium, and in this case, the new short-run equilibrium occurred at potential output, and that made it a long-run equilibrium as well.